Thanks for joining me here at EMP Cycle Works. Today we are building a 131 from a 2022 Street Glide using Fuel Motos 12-to-1 pistons. It's going to be a pretty sick bike, and thanks for watching. Alright, we're going to get this big bore kit installed. It's a brand new bike, but I just want to make sure the surface is completely clean. I'm going to use a piece of maroon Scotch-Brite for this. And the factory gasket barely had time to anneal. But what I don't want is this getting down into the motor, so you'd be very, very careful. Use my Metz Auto Parts brake cleaner. Rag just to make sure this is completely clean and dry. We don't want any leaks. So this cylinder kit came from Fuel Moto. It's supposed to be the pistons are supposed to be fit to the cylinders. It is definitely the responsibility of the engine builder to double check that though. So I'm going to double check it. I'm going to show you how I do it. We're going to use our dial bore gauge and a micrometer and check the fit of the piston to cylinder. And we don't have torque plates, so I'm just going to preface this by saying we don't have torque plates, so it's not going to be exactly perfect. So I'm looking for within like half a thousandths usually is what I see. If it's within that spec, then it's pretty good. And Fuel Moto gives a 3.5 thou piston to cylinder clearance, or CP Carrillo is where these pistons came from. So. So without any torque plates, this thing is within a half a thousandths to 3.5 thousandths piston to cylinder clearance. The cylinder is less than half a thousandths out of round. And again, we don't have torque plates, so it's actually really, really good. Next thing I'm going to do is check the rings. It says the ring gap is set, so we're going to double check that. Again, it's the engine builder's responsibility to double check everything. If you assemble this and it's off a little bit, it's your fault. No matter where you get it from. I mean, even companies like Fuel Moto or SNS or Harley, things happen, mistakes are made, but before you assemble, we have to double check everything. CP Carrillo has installation instructions for the pistons, and what we're looking for is street or high performance of the bore. The top ring gap is bore times 4.5 thou, and the second ring is 4 to 8 thousandths, but it's got to be bigger than the top ring. So the second ring has a little groove. That is a Napier ring. So that's the second ring. And then these are the top, and they are beveled here. Install it. This one is beveled, and that's going to be facing up, and that's so when the compression or the combustion forces come down on it, it will push this, it'll spread it and seal against the cylinder. So I'm going to measure this by using my pistons and the flats here to make it go 4.310 times 0.0045 So we're looking at 19 thousandths. 19 thousandths feeler gauge. And 18 thousandths is even tight. So it's 16 thousandths. So what we do is we take our ring file and file the ring, and we want to make sure the main thing is that we get the gap to the gap we want, and we have it square. We don't want like a taper on this cut that we're doing here. Once we get it filed down, we take our stone here and file down any burrs that are on this. That's the best way to scratch up the cylinder and just destroy the piston ring seal, is have a burr on this ring. So make sure it's clean on all 4 of the sides. Get it in, double check it. And again, we use the piston to square up the ring into the bore. And we do this as many times as it takes to get the correct measurement, and then we do it for the other rings on the pistons. Alright, we got our front and our rear. These cylinders have a FT and RR, front and rear. Also, they are dimpled to clearance when they sit like this in the engine. They clear each other, and the pistons are the same way. One side is clearance, so when the pistons are in the bottom, they don't hit. So I'm going to be assembling the bike this way, so I'm going to get the snap rings in the ring groove here. So I'm going to install them this way, so I want to get the clip in this side. Install the that worked. That one I was just able to manhandle, luckily. Okay. 2 clips. Alright, basically we set our ring gaps on these marks, and you kind of want to stagger them. So oil control ring, and then we'll use the first oil ring. And then the second oil ring is going to go 180 from that one. From the first one. And that didn't go right, get rid of the right groove. This is a scraper ring. So we'll put that. And make sure the marking is up and the groove in it is face down on the oil ring. And then the compression ring, I don't see that it's marked, but the bevel faces up on the compression ring. I'm going to put that 180 from the oil ring. And then double check. Assembly lube on our piston pins. And the bosses and the bores. And then we're going to use engine oil on the rings. And then our cylinders get oiled. That are cleaned. I had previously cleaned these. And I just did a twin cam video where I showed how to clean these. I'll link that in the description. Go ahead and watch that if you want to learn how to clean these. Or how I clean them at least. Now we're going to get these behemoths installed, starting with the base gasket and making sure the deck surface is completely clean beforehand. And then assembly lube on the small end of the rod. I'm going to install my cylinder stud covers to protect the piston rings here. Install the piston, making sure the orientation is correct. The piston pin slides in, and then we need to get the piston pin clips in, but I'm going to make sure that I do not drop it in again like I did on the disassembly here. And these CP Carrillo pistons, the piston pin clips are extremely difficult to get in, so I didn't show all that, but finally I was able to fight them, push them in, and then finally get them snapped in. And then just make sure you double check that it's in the green groove completely. And this one is. So we're good to move to the front. Now I install these with a band style clamp with the bottom arrow facing up. And this is because we're going to install these pistons into the bottom of the cylinder. And the ring compressor is tapered in such a way that the rings will collapse as it goes into the cylinder. And just make sure that the rings are in the ring grooves completely. And we are going to remove our stud protectors, or piston protectors, because the band clamp pretty much protects the cylinder, or the piston. And then rotate the cylinder carefully in over the studs. Hold the bottom of the piston. Try to get the piston started squarely in the bore and push it down. And also make sure the studs go into the holes in the cylinder. When everything's right, take the clamp off, and the cylinder is past the piston rings, and the piston rings are installed in the cylinder. Now we just rotate the band clamp out. Make sure you remove your rags for that cylinder, and then make sure our gasket's oriented properly. Carefully push the cylinder down into position. Boom. And with that sound, the rear cylinder is installed. Process is the same for the front. And again, just be very careful here. You want to make sure these rings go into the cylinder without rolling the rings or in any way bending them or breaking them, because that will damage and destroy the cylinder. Get rid of the band clamp, get rid of the rag, and then we gently ease the cylinder home. Great, the pistons are installed. Now I'm going to get rid of any excess oil that's on top of the piston here. I don't want to wipe the cylinder bore of oil, but I want to make sure the top of the piston doesn't have any oil. That can cause it to hydrolock when we're turning it over. Now we install our head gaskets, making sure our holes in the gasket are all even, and that it is a correct gasket, and the bore of the head gasket doesn't protrude into the bore of the cylinder. And these are proper Cometic gaskets, so we're good. Now we install our cylinder heads onto the dowels, being very careful and make sure they got the cylinder dowels located correctly into the head. And once they're on, should stay pretty nicely. So I'm going to install the rear head the same exact way. And now we're going to add a drop of oil to the threads of our bolts and underneath the heads of the bolts. And that just ensures that we get proper torque. And now we're going to follow the torque sequence in the head gasket kit from Cometic here. Tighten them down. I just do hand tight. And just make sure you follow the torque sequence that came with your head gaskets and the torque specs. Everyone's going to be different, so I'm not going to go through on this specific kit. Just make sure you follow the instructions. Now we get our left side manifold bolts in, and the manifold flanges are slotted to accept these, so you just slide the manifold right in. Kind of hard to see there, but this is a 64mm Screaming Eagle throttle body. Great addition to the 131 kit we're building here. And we put our front or our right side throttle body bolts in and torque them down. And I use a 3/8 drive 1/4 inch ball Allen socket here. Gives me really good access to these bolts to get them torqued down. And make sure we get our engine temperature sensor wire routed properly. And then I have a special 1/4 inch ball Allen on a tiny little socket here that makes getting into the left side bolts really easy. Now the lower rocker boxes go on, and I always use Harley gaskets here. They seem to seal better than Cometic or any other gasket that I've used. This is a little insurance, maybe a little bit more expensive, but a little bit of insurance for me. Then with blue Loctite, we get the center bolt installed and the 4 corner bolts installed on this lower rocker box. And then we want to torque them to sequence. This is where I see most leaks happen on these Milwaukee 8s. And I feel like it's because there's only 5 bolts holding this, and there's like 10 holding the top cover on. So this is kind of like a crucial step to get this right. So we torque them in a crisscross pattern. And I do it in 2 steps. I do 60 inch-pounds and then 120 inch-pounds. And then torque the center bolt to 120 as well. Assembly lube on the valves, on the tips of the valves, and then we assembly lube the rocker arms and the shafts. And we get them installed. But before we do the rocker arms, we need to get the breathers installed with new O-rings. Because as you can see, it goes underneath the rockers, the intake rockers at least. Blue Loctite on the bolt that holds the breather in. We run them down, and then we torque them to 120 inch-pounds. Now the rocker arm support bolts go in, making sure you blue Loctite them as well. Run them down evenly here, and then torque them to 24 foot-pounds. And then I double check to make sure they move freely. I don't want them bound up here at all. And then I always just double check most bolts that I torque, just because I can never am sure that I did it properly. I always want to make sure. So the gaskets go on, making sure they face the right way. Most of these upper rocker box gaskets have a marking where they dictate which direction is up. Blue Loctite on all the fasteners here. Get the fasteners installed. And I'm going to speed this up here because there are a lot of bolts here. So I just want to say thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, like, comment, and subscribe. Really helps out the channel. I'm trying to get better at this. So let me know what you like, what you don't like about the video. And make sure you stick around for part 3 where we install the cam chest. It's coming up very soon. And then we torque these bolts down in sequence. And there's 2 bolts on the rear head that are hard to get to. So I have a little special tool here that it's not a torque wrench, but what I do is I put it on one of the bolts that I did torque, and that way I can feel kind of where that torque is and get that thing torqued in. There's not a lot of clearance there to get a torque wrench in, so just a little secret of the pros, I guess, or at least what I do. I don't know if it's 100% proper, but... And this is one of the reasons why people dislike these Milwaukee 8s, the oil coolant hose that goes on the top of the motor. It's hard to get in, it's hard to get set right. Anytime you replace this, you make sure you put 4 new O-rings on it and carefully get it in there, because you could scratch up the fins of the motor, and especially this is a 600-mile motor, so the fins are immaculate on the head, so we don't want to scratch anything. And then make sure you get your cables running properly, the wires for all the sensors and the fuel injectors. There we go. And just carefully get it mounted in. As somebody does a burnout in the background there. This is a little bit longer form content than I've been doing. Kind of wanted to show you more in depth about what goes on in one of these builds. Give it a little bit more detail. So I put the oil coolant hoses on the front and the rear, and now I'm going to get the knock sensors in. Blue Loctite on these, and then torque them down. And I use the same wrench that I used on the manifold bolts right there. Makes getting in there real easy. So thanks a lot for watching. Like I said, if you enjoyed it, like, comment, and subscribe. Really helps out. And stay tuned for part 3. Thank you very much from EMP Cycle Works.